We are at a critical moment globally, one in which art, science, and technology must unite to develop new ideas and solutions to the world's most pressing problems, such as climate change, mass extinction, habitat loss, and perpetual war. How do you see an alliance between art and technology working for the betterment of humankind, animal kind, and the planet?
Well, I always thought, or still think like that art is the complement, in a sense, to science. If we invent something, we as humans have to understand it. And the understanding comes through a back door, through art. I went to art school in Germany, and I got a scholarship for a foreign country, and I chose at the time to go to Barcelona, to Spain. I inscribed in that art school there, which was called Escuela Manzana, but after one day I never returned. That's a different question. So art, for example, when in the 50s the abstract art was very famous, and Pollock, that was nothing else because science just discovered the molecules, and flying around in undefined space and stuff. So the art always explains the world in any kind, can be political, whatever you want. Art is the most fundamental language which we need to understand the world. I played music at that time and made paintings at the time, and moved 2 years later to Paris, where I went to the Beaux-Arts and studied there lithography for a while. And then I became independent since then. I was at that time very influenced by abstract expressionism. People like Pollock or somebody of this caliber was very important to me, or Tapies in Spain. And I always had this problem that to make a good work, you have to try 5 times to get it good. And that randomness bothered me, that I cannot control what I want to do, that I have to be lucky to get a good work. It took me many years to figure out that what I was doing was not logical in itself, it was emotional. And to get logical, I have to think about what I want to do and be able to take it apart in pieces to see how it is built. I looked in my music past and I invented algorithms which were linear, like music writing. In contrary to music, where it's a time element, I wanted not the time element. I wanted to make drawings where I choose if I want to go backwards or forwards and eliminate the time element in my art. The idea of taking the cube apart was my first idea of breaking the symmetry of the cube, not showing the totality of a system, but only parts of it. Because if I show the totality, that's after a while not interesting. When I started Cubic Limit, that was already a second phase. My first phase was more a linear phase, and at one point, like I explained earlier, the cube became my instrument. I was a musician, I made my money with music. I knew I can write down an idea and I can play it whenever I want it. So why couldn't I do in art something similar? And I was very interested in looking at the cube while it loses size. If there is a moment where the cube becomes flat, I mean, it loses three-dimensionality, but our brain is so wired that even if there is one line alone, you still feel the space. Lo and behold, I came upon a book from a German philosopher, Professor Benze, who talked about art in our time nowadays, which should be more logical, more reasonable, not from the stomach, but from the brain. I met Pierre Barbeau, which is a French composer who wrote computer music since the late 50s. And he explained to me what programming means, that you write little subroutines with ideas and you put them together. So he showed me in his music how this works, and I suddenly understood, of course, it's exactly what I have to do. If you want to use a certain technology, you have to look for it. It doesn't fall from the sky. So at that time, nobody even knew what a computer is, you know. So a computer, to find at that time, a computer was like air-conditioned, big, 2,000 square foot space. A technology where nobody even knew what's going on there. Sort of some friends of mine, we created a group. We had similar ideas. What can we do with a computer in art? Of course, I had to learn then programming, which is Fortran at the time, which was not so easy because there was no school or nothing at the time. Of course, we had neither computer nor nothing. So we got eventually a computer, but not a drawing machine. And so it was sort of helpless sitting there calculating things you can't do. At the French television, by luck, a program on the meteorology. The Weather Bureau just got a table traçante, that is a plotter, which draws the weather curves. I said, of course, that's what I need. If you take a square, there are two diagonals. But if you go on the outside of the square, in the two dimensions, that's a diagonal square. In the two dimensions, that's a diagonal path. So if I calculate this, and of course they were surprised, what do you want here? I said, I want to use your machines. I said, slowly. You have to write to the director of the meteorology, which is the minister of the transport, and then we'll see what happens. And I did that, and I got an answer by the minister of the transport and got an interview. Calculate a diagonal path through the structure. At that point, I knew I won here, and I got access to the meteorology at night because during the day they had their own things to do. So I worked there every night for 11 years. Your pocket, your telephone is probably more powerful than that machine was, but at that time, that was it. And I had a wonderful flatbed plotter. The machines itself is something which, I mean, as a kid I was building radios and amplifiers, and I had sort of a certain vision of technology. And in 2000 I built my own computers, you know. But the thing is that it is a collaboration of interests, because if I suddenly want to go to the moon, I need different technologies, so I have to look for it. So that was my way at the time to go to the moon. I had to find the way to the computer. This is just a drop on a hot stone because I did 1,000 times more work than this. At one point, around 1999, my work became so minimal. I worked for 35 years black and white that I could not explain anymore that these 5 lines are complicated. In electronics, the word wasn't invented yet. It was high and low frequency science, whatever. So I was always interested in the hardware side. But the computer was a shock to me. That was far beyond my knowledge, So it was incredible. Always these ups and downs of luck and no luck. 20 years after the war, a German coming to Paris, working in the meteorology, which is military, military area, That's not for nothing, So how do I get around that? So the luck I had is that the head of the department for the computer, who had to write down all my name and all this stuff, he was as a soldier after the war in Germany, as a little kid, in my hometown, and had to clean the street for the military so they can pass through. So we had an incredible human contact, So he filled out all the papers, gave me the magnetic card to go in at night, and took the piece of paper and tore it up and threw it out and said, "You have what I need, and here you don't exist." Isn't that wonderful? When I worked at night, I was, after a few years, I was familiar with all the operators, we were one family. So when I came in, I went myself to the computer. Normally you have to give your cards, and the operator reads them in and gives you the result. So I did everything myself. I went to the main computer and I put myself a high priority. You see, the highest priority is 7777. That's the weather. That has to run all the time. No, 77776. So when I came in and wanted to just test a little thing, I put myself on top of the weather to 7777, and it was done, and I had everything. One day, I come with a program, and the program was not finishing, it was cycling. And I got crazy, I had to stop it after a minute. And lo and behold, I stopped the whole Western European weather report for 2 minutes. So what should I do? So I came to the idea, if I show this diagonal path and fill the in-between space with random colors, and I rotated the whole thing, everybody can feel that there is some structure which holds everything together, and you think you understand, but you don't. But it doesn't matter. But you have a certain satisfaction that you see something which is beyond randomness. It holds together by internal logic. 4 randomly chosen diagonal paths, and do something which in real life doesn't exist. I look at the space between these 4 lines, which is not a mathematical space. I invent that space. And I color this space. 2 years ago, I went back to this idea of not rotating when I found, Jesus, I could do something with it. When I started to set it up like this, the difference is that I take all the elements and use them as elements to call up randomly. So the totality of the hypercube never exists, but always parts of it, which makes it a controllable system, but yet it's like a language which there's also never a repetition of anything. When I wrote a better program at the time, which I made all sorts of drawings which resulted in this kind of drawings here, And I made many works. Well, everything relates in my work to music. I mean, if you wanted, it's the 4 lines of music sheets, you know.
Yes.
But it's not necessarily to read it like this. But in music, you have the lines, and you have a black dot. That line gives the black dot a signification. You can see this is C, and this is D, this is F. So, in my work, I often have lines which orders the otherwise randomly hanging around lines into some order of significance. You know? When I really worked with the hypercube here, I divided, the 4-dimensional hypercube has 32 lines. So I made 4, 4, 4, 4, and each part has 8 lines. Whereas here, I calculate the same thing, but I don't show all 8 lines. I randomly choose the elements. So it's never all lines, which makes it very open and music-like in a sense. I suddenly had this vision, the cube is my instrument, which reunites the whole thing. If I could only invent an instrument which would unify everything I want to do to one object, and that was the cube. Now I try to extract from this cube a matrix of cubes. So it's slowly let it go, come out, and the in-between makes fantastic, visual forms, which I can't predict, I only can see them when it happens. So the cubes go slowly apart, and every time they get smaller and smaller, and the matrix gets pushed apart. It's the moment where I try to take lines away from the cube. So already here I destroyed the whole matrix idea. And now, in a second, you'll see that I take lines away randomly. This is the symbols I was looking for. Before I came to the computer, I was an abstract painter. And I drew drawings like this one. This is from 1963, before I even knew what a computer is. These were musically developments, visual, which I could even play myself, or we played in the jazz club sometimes. And it's only after that time that I read about Max Bense, who talked about an art which is not emotional, but more scientific and more, in a sense, intellectual. It's called Random Walk, and they are in a defined rectangular or square space. It can go wherever it wants. The lines could be thick or thin, or that there could be repetitions of lines. So I went slowly. I learned how to write an algorithm.